So, do you think that homelessness has a link to colonialism?
Well, there's no question that it does. Now, of course, not. Uh, there's lots of people who are homeless from lots of different cultures, and so it's not the only issue. Uh, um, all races of people are homeless in the city of Montreal, basically. But of course, we have this unfortunate history in Canada of over 100 years of cultural genocide, and one of the sad realities of the last year is finding some of these grave sites all across the country, uh, you know, containing uh, uh, markings of genocide. And when that's been your essentially your the functioning of your country for over 100 years, there's going to be ramifications. There's going to be social problems that follow from that. You know, and if you've put people through an awful lot of suffering, like you take away their language and their culture, then you shouldn't be surprised when that suffering leads to other problems. Like if you torture people over an extended period of time, obviously they're going to be more susceptible to looking for sources of comfort in the midst of their torture. And so you're going to be more susceptible, for example, to be, addicted to alcohol if essentially you've had your culture removed from you very slowly and painfully. And of course, once you have enough people who are really struggling with an addiction to alcohol, you're also going to have other problems which follow from that, like conflict, like anger, like violence, like assault, like problems in the community where people end up losing their children. And yes, there's obviously going to be further problems, which over time are going to lead to uh, people essentially ending up on the street. That is, um, being so isolated from the supports around them that the street ends up the last place they can be.
Thank you so
So,
much.
yeah, I mean, yeah,
Um, Among the clientele that you support, specifically among Indigenous clienteles, are you seeing, survivors of the 60 scoop residential schools, or maybe ones who had family members in these situations?
yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's common. Like we have rough, the biggest population here would probably be Inuit, and among the Inuit who are here, the most common thing that you see are people who are second generation residential school survivors. So maybe they didn't go to residential school themselves, but their parents did, um, and so they're in some ways, yes, living out that reality. Yeah.
And are you also seeing things like uh, people moving from Nunavut to Montreal to seek medical help and getting I know that's kind of a factor as well, or maybe
Yeah.
anything else you're seeing
Oh, for
that
sure.
contribute. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's why three main reasons why Inuit end up homeless in the city of Montreal. Here they are. First, Inuit come down here for medical treatment. If you have a significant medical problem that requires a specialist, say an extended cancer treatment that you're going to need to go through, it's going to be more than what a small northern hospital can provide. And you'll be sent to the city of Montreal for possibly a lengthy treatment. Sometimes you'll be sent with a family member or a friend to escort you if that's needed. And what happens often is after the treatment, a person who will come to Montreal and has been here a while Often the city of Montreal can feel uh, like this paradise, a paradise because the prices are so much cheaper than in the north, um, and there can be a certain allure to, hey, maybe I should stay in Montreal and try, try things out living in Montreal. Um, and Unfortunately, uh, that doesn't always go so well. And But that would be one of the main reasons why Inuit end up coming to Montreal is uh, in the search for healthcare treatment. The second main reason why Inuit come to Montreal is there's actually a housing shortage in the north, where you have um, more families than you do houses. And so you have situations where you have more than one family living in the same house sometimes. And so it's basically overcrowding. And so um, to get away from that, sometimes Inuit will come to the south to simply get away from the problems of overcrowding in the north. And then the third main reason why Inuit come to Montreal is, simply to seek a better life. Okay, so it could be that you've had conflict with a family member, and you're in a small community of like 500 people, and it's pretty hard if you've had a conflict with someone in a small community of 500 people and be bumping into them every day. That can be a challenge, and so often people say, "Well, I want to get, I want some more anonymity," uh, uh, and uh, and so they'll come to the south, to get away from that conflict, uh, or perhaps they'll come to the south because they're looking to pursue education or some other sort of way to better their life. And so those are the main three reasons why Inuit come to Montreal and end up in Montreal.
Thank you so much. So I know in the past we've spoken lengthily about what the city is doing, what they're not doing, what they need to be doing. But when we
Yeah,
think of these three cases, and especially generational trauma, is there maybe a specific way that the city of Montreal should be responding to homelessness among Inuit and other Aboriginal communities? I know that's kind of a difficult
sure,
question.
sure. So yes, I mean, unfortunately, one of the challenges in the field of homelessness is that there is quite limited funding. Okay, so nationally, in the country of Canada as a whole, it's not a top priority dealing with homelessness. Okay, it's quite a ways down the list of priorities. Now, what that means is that there's very limited funds for dealing with the problem of homelessness. And so you have different groups with different priorities, often essentially competing for very limited funds. Um, and and that often makes for very ideological territory, where one group will want to claim their importance, well, we're the long-term solution, you know, we're the solution that brings you sort of more bang for your buck. and and that's a kind of a marketing campaign in a sense. And so, for example, you'll see a tension between emergency services and, for example, housing first solutions. Okay, or in fact, right there they have there's the entrance of an ideological term, solution. uh, so You'll have like, and this enters into the public discourse quite a lot. And if you're very careful, you'll pick up on the rhetoric. Okay, but take for example this little tent in Cabot Square Park. It's the Raphael Andre tent. You would not believe how many politicians and homeless leaders of large centers refer to this tent, which keeps people alive in Cabot Square Park, as a quote-unquote Band-Aid solution. All right? It's a Band-Aid solution. Why is it a Band-Aid solution? Well, it's only keeping people alive. It's not a long-term solution to the problem of homelessness. I don't know about you, but I think Raphael Andre would have been happy to have a heated tent on the night he died. Would have been a little more than a Band-Aid for him. And in fact, if you investigate the problem further, what you find out is the people who use our services, the Indigenous population who use our services, are actually, for the most part, people who have been through a Housing First program where they get housed and rehoused and rehoused and rehoused. They've been kicked out of the program, the so-called long-term solution, and they're back on the street. And when they go to seek shelter, they're told, oh, they're part of a Band-Aid solution. All right, and so this is where the rhetoric becomes really silly. You get this tension between, Housing First advocates who will say, take the money out of emergency services, put it in the more economical and efficient to the dollar long-term solutions, Housing First. All right, and there becomes this ideological battle where you have to prove that, your solution is better than the other solutions, and so you're more deserving of the money, the very limited money that there is. All right? And of course, the smaller that the government funding is available to homelessness, the smaller the funding is, the more the ideological tensions get tense, because you have all the groups coming in for the smaller amount of money. And people say, why do our homeless services in silos where different groups don't talk to each other? You don't talk to your competitor, If you're bidding at an auction, you don't go tell your competitor what your limit is. And that's what it is. It's like it heightens the competition the smaller the funding is that's available, and then you get these ideological tensions which follow. So in short, unfortunately, it's true that often Indigenous populations in Montreal, Inuit like at Resilience Montreal, most of the Inuit who are using our services have been in a Housing First program. They've been rejected from the program. Now they're back on the street. And the end result has been frequently that there's more racism among landlords who are now less willing to rent to Inuit. And this doesn't get picked up by the researchers, let me tell you. In fact, I was the supervisor of one such program. And I can tell you there was an awful lot of pressure on me not to share about failings in the program. All right? In other words, it was getting harder and harder to house the participants in our program. And instead of saying, hey, maybe the model isn't working, the approach was, let's not let that information out. Let's not talk about that. All right? And so what can happen is, if you get people in a very ideological space, is that they can they can create solutions that are not solutions. And so if you're Inuit now in the city of Montreal trying to find an apartment after a number of Housing First programs have burned through the area, and there's a rise in racism among landlords, it's now harder for Inuit to find housing than it was before. That's a problem. Yeah. And that's a problem that the research is only beginning to get at. And as it does over time, I'm sure inevitably there will be, but it takes years for this kind of thing to occur.
And just to confirm, when you said that they're being kicked out of the Housing First program, it's because of landlords just not accepting them. Is that right?
So the way it would work is, um, so probably what you should do is do some research on Housing First and the way it functions. The way it advertises itself, and there's a whole movement to end homelessness. There's a national conference in Canada. It's called the Movement to End Homelessness. Housing First is a dominant approach there. At the national conference, our team presented a number of years ago and presented our program on our Inuit Housing First program for Inuit, um, and of course emphasized the strengths of the program, and certainly didn't emphasize other aspects. And uh, um, yeah, and so sorry, I just keep making these pop-ups go away. They keep showing up on my screen while we're trying to have this conversation.
No worries.
And I'm trying to sort of make them disappear so that we can actually continue. And sorry. So you might have to chop some of that out from your video.
No worries.
But yeah. So I forget now. Where are we? Housing First, and some of the limitations. So often what happens is you get researchers who are very much aware that there's very limited funding in the field of homelessness, and they get stuck on a certain approach that they think is going to save the day, like Housing First. And so what they do is they go and they produce research and push governments to invest more money in, say, the Housing First approach, which is very common right now in Canada. And they'll often also add that their money is much better spent there than in emergency services, like keeping people alive while they wait for housing. Okay? Now, and so what happens is governments often buy into this and will say, well, we're going to invest in long-term solutions, like Housing First projects, not quote-unquote Band-Aid solutions like tents in a park that keep people alive at night. The problem is, at the end of the day, you need both. You both need to keep people alive while they wait for housing, and then you also need more long-term solutions like permanent housing. Yeah. And so it's not one or the other, it's both. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And then I just want to ask, I know there's a lot of negatives to focus on this story, but is there anything you want to say, comment on, just in terms of resilience you see among people who, especially ones who are constantly kicked out of these programs and just ending up back at Resilience or other emergency services?
So yeah, we work with people where they're at. The approach here is you walk in the door. We don't have a list of services per se. You walk in the door, you meet the person, you treat them with some respect, you find out what they need, and what they need is what we do. So, if they need to return to their home community in the north, then that's what we do. Everything involved: getting ID, getting to the airport, getting a plane ticket, all of that. So if they say they come in, they need an apartment, then that's what we do. If they come in, they say they need detox or rehab services, that's what we do. So basically, yeah, I mean, that's we tend to try and move away from this institutional approach of just sort of having the list of services where you talk to the anonymous person who runs you through the list and is just kind of a functionary in the process.
Thank you so much. And just very last question. I know that many services had their funding cut on March 31st. Did this extend to the Raphael Andre warming tent, or is it still running?
Yeah. The latest. So we facilitate the tent at Resilience. We let them use our kitchen, for example, and they also store food in our basement, in our fridge, but it has its own leadership. I mean, I don't run the Raphael Andre Memorial Tent. Uh, and so I can't really tell you exactly what their situation is. I know that they're looking for a building, and so that they can continue their services. That's the goal. And the question will be, what happened? They're going to buy a building somewhere.